I am so thrilled to have this conversation with Valerie Umschied. I think it's so important because all of us at some point in our life go through grief. I mean, we can't avoid it, right? And it's really like a brick sometimes the way it hits you. Her book is wonderful. You can see her, and behind her you can see a copy of her book. I have a copy of this wonderful book that, in fact, I'm sending to a couple of friends who just have gone through some things. It's called The Tool for Grief and Loss: Effective Healing Strategies. And why is Valerie qualified? Because she's human like us and she's experienced loss. And also, she is a licensed psychologist and has dealt with this with so many people. Valerie, thanks so much for having this conversation with us.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Kate. It's great to be here.
So in your personal life, you lost both of your parents to cancer. You had a brother-in-law who committed suicide. That's tough, and that's a different kind of loss. And then sadly, your husband died from complications of COVID. And these were all different times and scenarios, but you've gone through it. And even with your training, it is an incredibly difficult thing to deal with, isn't it?
It is. And there's so many different aspects to loss, right? And often, for me, when my parents died, it was actually a gift in a way, because up until that time, I didn't really understand the grieving process. And so I learned a lot of things through dealing with their deaths. And then that helped me as a therapist. I started really looking at what are helpful strategies that help people heal. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to write the book. I just wanted to have people have practical strategies that would help them to heal.
And the book, the way you laid it out, I love the cover because it is a toolbox. So when you set out to write the book, is that what you had in mind? Like, okay, I have these tools, I can give you these tools, but you also have to be part of this, because you lay out in the chapters the things that we should think about and do and write about, right?
Yes. Well, it's interesting. When I started writing, I actually just had a lot of clinical files, so different clients I had worked with, and they all had different experiences with loss. And so I just was trying to capture, how do people heal? And then, of course, all these, I was able to share all these different strategies that go with the different stories.
Yeah, right in the beginning. So again, here's the book. It's easy to find on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever great books are sold. But there's so many different things that I picked out that I think are wonderful. And right from the start, you talk about a grief processing letter. And then you talk about what you do with this letter. When I think of these memories I feel, my happiest memory of being together is, the biggest challenge for me has been, I hadn't expected that. I think it's so powerful. And tell us more about this exercise, really.
Okay. The exercise is to help people address the normal sequence of grief emotions. And so it depends on where a person is at. Sometimes if they've had a loved one who's died from a chronic illness, they might not necessarily have shock. For example, like with a sudden death, a suicide, or an unexpected death, people often are in a state of shock initially, right? And then after that, they might go through other emotions, like guilt. I should have told them how I felt, or regret about not doing something. And then we move into anger, sadness, and then hopefully people get to often people call it acceptance. I call it reconciling yourself to the death, where you get to this place of where you don't hurt as much and you're able to focus on more happy memories, right? But the process letter helps people to actually go through the different emotions and acknowledge them. And that's part of the healing process. But we also need to feel to heal, right? We need to feel the depths of those emotions, and that helps us in that healing journey.
And this as a psychologist, isn't it really what a lot of us do is just try to get away from it, try to bury it, try to not deal with it. I'll eat ice cream, I'll go out, I'll do all these different things, whatever it is, I don't want to deal with it. And I think that's common, and it's not healthy though.
Right. And so I think it's a natural kind of human reaction. We try and avoid pain. And yet often when we use uh, working too much, eating too much, drinking too much, smoking too much. I mean, there's so many different ways we deal with grief that aren't really effective. And so we need to actually be able to move past that to a place of feeling it. The other thing I want to point out is people often believe this myth, that time heals all wounds. And for many people, it doesn't, right? They can get stuck in grief for different reasons. And so it's really important for people to actively grieve, to actually acknowledge the loss so that they can move forward on their healing journey.
Yeah, that's wonderful to tell everybody that. There's something that you talk about, and I mentioned at the top with your brother-in-law, and it's chapter 5, and it's the 2 deaths, traumatic loss due to suicide. What do you mean by that, and how difficult is it to deal with that?
Okay. Well, when people, usually suicide is unexpected, so we're not, pardon me, we're not expecting it. So if we come onto the scene, for example, and we see the person who has died, we go into a state of shock. And because we're in a state of shock, we don't, our brain, the way it operates is we don't actually, it's hard to describe. Sorry, I was trying to think of how to describe it.
It's hard to describe, yeah.
What happens is that we don't fully process the memory. So the memory sort of becomes active. And so people often will get flashbacks, or they might get nightmares. They're constantly thinking about the person that's died. And so because of that, that interferes with the processing. So people often need to do a type of trauma therapy, and there's different kinds of therapy. I use something called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is recognized. It's used a lot by the military for people that have been in battle, but there's other kinds of battle. And so a lot of times people that have witnessed their loved one after suicide, they go into the same kind of shock response, and they need to have a different kind of method of processing their loss. So once they can get past that, then often they can use the other grieving strategies to help them heal.
Yeah. Another thing I love about your book is that you address all different types of grief, and that's an example of it. The other thing you talk about is helping your child cope with grief. This is one of the things I talk about all the time, that it's so sad, but when you're a child, you don't really learn that. You don't learn how to process that. And I know from personal experience, my father died when I was 8 years old, and it was just a shock. And it was like, be strong and we move on. And boy, then you're not processing. And so tell the people watching this a little bit more about that.
Okay. Well, I think that a lot of times adults aren't aware of how children grieve. And for children, they go through the grief symbolically. So that's why a lot of times as a therapist, we use different kinds of therapy for children, like art therapy, play therapy, sand tray. There's different ways of helping them process loss. And a lot of times adults just don't, they maybe don't see the child grieving outwardly, and so they think the child isn't grieving, and yet they are. And we might see it in their play, and we can help them in different ways. One of the ways I talk about is actually getting them to do like a memory box, which is really, really helpful. And it's something that the adult can actually do with their child. And also just helping them through play. And a lot of times we don't actually, it's like if we're hurting too, then we're trying to actively avoid bringing it up. It's like we're thinking, oh, I don't want to talk about it because I don't want them to have pain, and yet they have pain. So what we need to do is acknowledge it and talk about it. So often I'll tell parents, when you're at the kitchen table, you can say, oh, are you really, missing your friend or their pet? We know a lot of times people have experienced terrible loss because of losing a pet. They have such a strong attachment to the animal. And so both, children and adults can go through a grief process when they lose a pet.
Yeah, the book is wonderful. Again, the Toolbox for Grief and Loss, and you've got these incredible, like you say on the subtitle, effective healing strategies. Valerie, what else would you tell people about the book? I mean, I think it's very user-friendly. Like, I think you could pick it up at any point, depending on what's happened in your life. That's what I like about it. You're not preaching, you're using the information, sharing that. And then what we've talked about is the things, the strategies, like you say, that you can use to get over that hump, so to speak, in a way.
Mm-hmm. Well, the way the book is designed, these are true stories. I've changed the names and identities to protect people, but they're true stories. And so you can just open a chapter and read it. And it could be about, like there's so many people who experience divorce, for example. So you could look at, well, what are some steps that I can do to help me process that loss of that relationship, right? Or we talked about if you've lost a loved one to suicide or traumatic loss. Other types of loss are, for example, as we age, we end up with disability, right? We're not able to do the same things we used to. We have to get through the loss of a career. When many of us, that's part of our self-identity, and it's really difficult to do that. And so each chapter covers a different kind of loss, right? In the book, I also talk about ambivalent loss, and that occurs when people go through a chronic illness with someone. So for me, like with my husband, for example, he had something called Lewy body dementia, and he was a brilliant man, and over 4 years, he became someone else. So he didn't know me or our children. And so there was a lot of loss there. And so I wanted people to understand that. And in many ways, I hope it helps others to be supportive of people that have experienced a loss and understand what they're going through, right? And be realistic about how long it can take to heal.
Absolutely. So in summation, and you've really weaved it in throughout this conversation so brilliantly, but what do you hope people take away from reading your book?
I guess the number one message would be you can heal. And, that's my mission in life, is to help people heal. And I want people to know that they can choose that and they can move forward in their lives.
Valerie, wonderful stuff. Great gift to give somebody who's going through something. Great gift to give to yourself. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate your time, Kate. Have a great day.
You too.